final session, countdown. I don't think I've ever talked for 3 days in a row, which is, I didn't think I could do it, but I have. I might keep going, actually. Just keep on and on and on. So anyway, hope you enjoyed your lunch. So welcome to the final session. So this morning, just to recap, we looked at some of the definitions of what we're talking about with special abilities, special exceptional abilities and autism spectrum disorder. A second session, we looked at some of the ways that we could identify and assess savant skills and twice exceptional abilities. So, of course, it follows a logical sequence, I hope, that this afternoon we'll have a little look at ideas for how you might program for those, and we'll also kind of look at the change, the move from school to post-school, and some issues around, vocational, perhaps, looking at post-school outcomes from a slightly different perspective, not just employment, even though some of the slides this afternoon are kind of, supporting that, but also other quality of life outcomes as well. And I guess, stepping right back, that's why we're here today, aren't we? And raising this, and right down to early intervention providers, therapists of very young children, the message is exactly the same. It's kind of about the end result. And I know that even in the schools, in the organisation I work for, I've said this to some others the last few days, but on entry, we actually say to the parents the day they enrol, our aim is not to keep your children in this intensive autism-specific environment, but to one day, if possible, work to move them back into the wider educational community. And it's the same philosophy with, addressing, look at the exceptional skills and abilities, really is the aim to think wider. How can these skills benefit our people post-school, but in their wider community, even during their school age years? Yeah, so let's go. Just some of the learning outcomes, I'll let you read those for yourself. Having said I can talk forever, I had better not. And I will move reasonably quickly because I'm determined to put you through that quiz again at the end. So, yeah. And we're not even on slideshow, are we? Sorry. We weren't quite ready, Meg. Now we are. Yeah, great. Again, that question, I've raised it several times this morning. Why? Why do we need to differentiate the curriculum? As we said, and just recapping, the aim of all education, forget special ed, forget autism, style education, it's, all education is to equip our students to hopefully achieve a successful life. Whether mainstream education can testify that's the outcome that results from current education, I'm not sure, but yeah. Second reason for our population is that research, without doubt, is highlighting post-school outcomes generally, and not generally, universally are poor. Just this study here is one of our own. Our previous, Deborah Costley, is now at Birmingham University in the UK. Deborah was working with me on our research program, and in Deborah's time, we explored undertaking a survey of Asperger, or at that time, high-functioning adults on the autism spectrum to sort of probe what were the outcomes for this group. In some ways, people would or could assume that the outcomes may be much better than more or less able people on the spectrum. But I think there was 135 adults who joined that survey, and there was less than 50% were in any type of employment of that, really. Some of them had multiple university degrees, etc. So, and, a great deal of other poor quality of life outcomes. And again, as I mentioned before, Patricia Howland, who's part of our research team, with our survey work that we're doing here with the Trevor Centre, and a lot of her studies are indicating the same. So there's really good reason to me, it's clear to me, I hope it's coming clearer to you guys, why we need to do this, okay? It's about the long-term goal. The achievement of happiness and independence is a quality of life goal, basic human right, and it's not immediately available to many on the autism spectrum. And I guess to me this is an important point. Quality of life is different things to different people. It is more than gaining employment and may involve pursuit of leisure and recreation activities based on interests, strengths, and for some, the exceptional abilities. Okay, and I think, as we go through the afternoon's discussion, I want us to be thinking too about this side of things. Those with savant skills, TUI abilities, it's not all, about gaining employment, living a neurotypical life, whatever that is. I'm still not sure. It becomes more and more unclear, as I said to me, the more I look at these things. So, okay, are people all right about that? Yeah. Many reasons why we should be exploring differentiating curriculum.
Xavier, and your first one is 771 followed by 776. Score run is 4568, 4513, 789, 7989. No break at Benrid Station, followed by 791, 797, and 797. Finish. Your two school runs is from Xavier and St. Dom's. And Xavier,
You know who the driver is from McCarthy? John Granucci.
John Granucci does McCarthy.
Yep.
Xavier, have you entered the school ground? Do you enter the school ground for Xavier?
Yes, I'm the first one there. First bus there.
Yeah, the first bus. You're the first bus at Xavier. And there is a teacher on duty at Xavier.
Yes. He calls out my number on the two-way.
Yeah.
It was a student, ex-student of one of our schools in the western suburbs of Sydney, Larry, who it came into the media. He'd recently been employed by one of the school transport companies. Can anyone suggest why he was employed for that company, or what was the type of skill you thought he might be demonstrating there? Viv? Yep, that's right. He knew all the bus routes, all the names of all the people at the different schools where the school transport, the buses went. What type of skill is that underpins that? Memory, yeah. So Larry really had quite a prodigious savant memory skill, and that's a great example of post-school that he, with support, gained employment at that company related to a skill. And that's what we love to see more and more. And it is beginning to happen in pockets around the world, but I just thought it was a lovely example, and it was one boy from our own school system back in Sydney. Yeah. So as I said this morning, it's not all about the intellectually able, but areas of strength often observed, and I hope I got the references there. That didn't disappear from that slide. Yeah, great. One of the major, strategies that in terms of my initial research in the savant skill curriculum is the use of mentorships, okay? And they have been attributed to successful application of savant skills for individuals on the spectrum. And I think it goes without saying, just for your information, mentorships are one of the key strategies in gifted education programs. And when you look back into the literature about human achievement, success, and I'm talking up to genius level, and I would say 100%, there's been a very significant mentor, if not mentors, in that person's life. Okay, so when we did our original study, we borrowed, because I, accidentally slipped into the field of gifted education. I thought, what can we bring to bear with the student I was teaching, given his pretty extreme prodigious skills? I didn't have at my fingertips as a teacher nothing in the autism strategy repertoire seemed to fit. So I thought, let's just take a gamble, look outside, see what they're using gifted ed. Can we drag those in and apply them in a curriculum, which we did. And I guess, some of these ones here, and again, Daryl just talked about them in his books, Lonzo Clemens, Richard Warrow, Stephen Wilshire, Ping Lian, who's from Sydney, Tim Sharp, the Australian artist I mentioned before. And I guess even in my book, I talk about some of these artistic savants, I would say, and when you look through the journey of those people, there has been a significant mentor. Sometimes it's been the mother, and I think, as you put it to me the other day, the mother as the manager, the other term for mentorship. So yeah, a very key strategy, and one that I would encourage people to explore if they're working closely alongside, whether it's into, vocation at the post-school transition end of the education spectrum, or it's, early start, find someone else that's interested. And we did talk, with the Trefford new school team about with their own strengths and interests, identify those, because you as teachers, therapists can play a role in providing mentorship to some of your students. And so you've got a resource, and furthermore, I did suggest, ask the parents of those 41 children, what are their great skills, someone else in the family, and already you've got a list, a resource that you may be able to tap into to provide some mentorship. The other thing I like about mentorships, it's individual, it's one-on-one. What a better fit to working with children on the spectrum. And you might change, that term, and we'll look at it in a moment, I won't jump ahead. So just in terms of, educational programming for children with, who display savant skills, there were a few studies. Even my study was done back in the dark ages. Now it's still the only one, which is why I can feel secure, even as a researcher who don't like anything that goes beyond about a 2 or a 5 year limit in time. But there still hasn't been one that's replicated that. People have talked about it, but I think it still is, a valuable resource if that's the way you look at it. And I think what the strategies we use can be applied across to those with 2E abilities. So just very quickly, I'm not going to labour this. There were 22 children, and when we put out the call for those that may display or identified as having a savant interest, we used that screener I showed you on the screen before, or the nomination form. So again, they're very useful, and again, we borrowed that from gifted education. So we had 16 children. I designed a curriculum that ran for 24 months. God knows why I did that now, or how I did it, 12 months. Originally, I thought probably wouldn't be long enough for any positive change. So we took the gamble and did it over a 24-month period. There was a small group of students who kind of missed out on the study. Being one person, I couldn't really facilitate the additional students, but the parents agreed that we compared, some of the measures on children who didn't receive this curriculum over that 24-month period. We did pre and post-test measures, but we were primarily in the study looking at this. Can there be any functional application? What point, what use is a calendar calculation skill? What use is a memory for number plates, people's birthdays, etc.? So that was really a major focus of what we were looking at. And, so as well as the use, second part of the study, and this is really important, to design teaching goals for activities, and this can apply no matter what age and stage you're working with, based on their memory, music, art interests, to teach social communication skills, to support their sensory difference, to support behaviours if the children are going through, patches of, quite difficult behaviours. Okay, so it was the very first, and we did add some information that it was the aim. to support Darryl and his work to add to the literature about savant syndrome. So this is the important thing from the programming point of view. As I said, we borrowed these strategies, enrichment, acceleration and mentoring from the field of gifted education, as well as combining them with your autism intervention strategies. We'll look at them a bit more closely. And I guess I viewed it was like looking through a double lens. And when I made the comment before about kind of falling into the field of gifted education, it brought a different way of me looking back at the students I was working with. It was really looking through the double lens that I think, provided an insight going forward. Again, this is a little boy who came to one of our schools, who's now a young man, and I believe he's been here with his mother, visited the Trevor Centre, and again, he was very much slightly different boy with an exceptional drawing skill, in that his mother, Sarah Lee, acted very strongly and very quickly when she recognised her boy with autism was displaying an interest in drawing. From a very early age, got mentors. He was tutored by a number of different art teachers and who facilitated him for a number of years to help him develop his drawing ability. For some other of our savant artists, there hasn't been that in-depth tutoring from an art tutor, that the skills have developed themselves into a pretty high level, and perhaps later on, an art teacher or mentor has been, supported their work. But this is the case of a mother, Sarah Lee, who's a very strong advocate for her son, but engaged a range of tutors and mentors from an early age. And to be honest, it was very successful. So whichever way you look at it, we're looking at outcomes for our people. What is the end result? And he's, exhibits worldwide, Ping Lian. This is another one. This is kind of the Singaporean version. In my travels and work in my organisation, we have a lot to do. There's a very big autism program in Singapore, if anyone's been there. If you ever do, see if you can visit the Pathlight School for children with autism. It's an incredible school offering great programs, and their whole emphasis is on strengths and interests. So it's interesting, there are other pockets of the world and through some of the Asian countries, which, at first thought you might think is almost as kind of surprising. But in my experience also in China, is that there are pockets of people who really believe strengths and interests is the way to go for young Chinese children on the spectrum. So it is a change in focus, and it is beginning to happen around pockets in the world, which is fantastic, I think. Yeah, and this is another boy, very similar to the English artist, Stephen Wiltshire, in his drawing of buildings, and that's pretty phenomenal, I think. But again, it's been the school that recognised his artistic talent, and they have a fantastic program. In fact, they've even established, they call it the Enterprise Village. It's set up like a village in downtown Singapore that employs young people on the spectrum. It's an incredible transition vocational program, and they've managed to talk a lot of businesses, banks, IT companies, restaurants. I think Starbucks are involved, and they've set up this village that only employs people on the spectrum, and all these kind of, and I guess many are add-ons, in terms of the banks. They're doing particular work, with supervision at the Enterprise Village. But again, I do recommend, if you ever get there, the Pathlight School, and that will lead you to the Enterprise Village. So again, just an example of programs that are going on in other places. Okay, let's look at the other group, the wider 2E ability students. There's not much in terms of the literature about validated or research, evidence-based treatments and interventions. Nevertheless, in the research and some of the kind of experts in gifted education have given us some underlying principles or guidelines. So, and again, I've said to the group at the Trefford School, as they go forward, there's a big opportunity to provide, fill the gaps in the research around this cohort of students on the spectrum. So I fully encourage that. Intervention should be individualised, okay? And that's what we really refer to as dual programming. So, and we've talked about it all morning, working on the strengths, but it's also working on the deficits. So it's not one over the other, it's a combination of the both. And my view is you can actually take the strength, the interest, exceptional ability, savant skill to develop your adaptive teaching goals. And we'll see some examples soon. Intervention should be aimed at building strengths and supporting the areas of special need. So just remember, these ideas are coming from gifted education, the other side of the fence, who've been focusing and looking at, TUI, gifted disabled students, across all the cohorts. TUI students on the spectrum. As we said before, teachers have very limited knowledge how to implement accommodations for our students who are 2E, twice exceptional. As research continues, strategies developed for educational programs for the broader group of 2E students should be adopted for students on the spectrum. So at this point in time, many of the ideas, and we're just going to walk you through them, equally apply to working with our population of students with autism. IEPs, that's a given. How better we're set up for it, aren't we, in our field? Absolutely. You might be interested to know IEPs are now being adopted in gifted education as a primary platform to provide an appropriate program for gifted students as an IEP, rather than, the generic classroom program. The dual programming approach, as I just mentioned, again, and this is resonating, Azulin, here in the US, she is a great, if you want to do more reading about TUI, strategies, this is the woman to look at. And some of her references are in your handout book. So dual programming, okay? Expertise of professionals, and she has a vision in both autism and gifted education. So we share the same vision. Wouldn't it be neat if our school counsellors, psychs, our autism experts were part of the one team, or the knowledge that was there about both. Surprise, surprise. How unusual do you want to have a caring atmosphere in a classroom? But I think, by setting up your school, that's what you're going to provide immediately. And the students, without doubt, that's the first thing they will notice, I'm absolutely sure, is that caring atmosphere that focuses on strength-oriented accommodation. And I've used the term which will be oozing out of the walls of the new Trefford School. As parents, other visitors, you'll see it the minute you arrive. And I did talk about a school I visited in the city in Guangzhou in China, and it was a school for students with autism, but again, the principal's philosophy was about strengths and interests. So when a group of us visited the school, it was everywhere. Music flowing out of classrooms, children engaged in art activities, etc. And first of all, I thought, she's very clever. The principal set this up for her team of visitors, but I knew people that had worked there, and it was just part of the core business of the school. Use of special centre classrooms, and again, probably more in a mainstream environment to have dedicated areas, centres or classrooms, where self-direction, self-reflection, problem-solving, inquiry-based curriculum experiences. And we have been talking about project or thematic work in the new school, which is, the same concept. It's where children can work on their topic. If it's spiders, dinosaurs, whatever, the project unit is set up for them, but all the activities really allow them to do all these things, to inquire further, research more about ants, spiders, whatever their topic is, and there's a whole deal of self-directed learning that can flow from it. Okay, other strategy, and this is the one we borrowed and used in our savant skill curriculum, enrichment programs. So it's an improvement in motivation and behaviour when students focus on their own area of study and end product. So it's an add-on to the normal curriculum. And we were talking about, we've used kind of topic, interest, boxes, kit stations in the classroom where, if the reading is done, and the reading might be based on their area of interest, but they can also go to their, as part of what we would call an enrichment program, to their topic box, their interest, whatever it may be, that allows that additional time spent on those. Provision of a talent supportive environment. So in other words, instruction on, the deficits, compensatory strategies, combined with awareness of the strengths and weaknesses. So again, the new school, you're going to be offering this immediately. That's what it's all about. Just a couple of others. So when we talk about acceleration, people often think, gifted children sometimes accelerated up years of schooling or grades, year groups, whatever you call them here in Wisconsin. But I guess it's really more this one we were talking about, telescoping. And that means if you're teaching a curriculum area, you can collapse it so the children, if they're able to, can move through those topic curriculum content areas much faster than, what you might be doing as a teacher, gradually stepping your children through different topics, different stages of that particular curriculum topic. The other one is subject-specific acceleration. Again, that's not uncommon, used in gifted education and might be appropriate here for the new school. The children might go out for, really at the level of looking at advanced mathematics. May not be something you can provide on site, but you might find opportunities for them to do an integrated lesson in the local, secondary, high school, whatever it may be. I think it's something that's worth consideration as well. Yeah, so that's really subject specific. Dual enrolment, I think you said you do have that here, do you, in Wisconsin? Sort of, yeah. In my state back in New South Wales, we don't. In some states in Australia, what that means is you can enrol a child in a school 2 days a week here, a different program here the rest of the week, 3 days a week. Dual enrolment. And it is a strategy, if it's available, can be quite useful. And particularly in gifted ed, where, really bright gifted child might attend a different setting for several days a week and then back to their usual school program. Early entry into schooling, grade skipping are some of the other types as well. And the other one, it's not uncommon in gifted, and I've heard of autistic adolescents being early entry into tertiary colleges, or in our country, we tend to go straight from our high school into a university setting. So it could be early entry for those. Ability grouping, so special schools, the new school for exceptional minds as an example. Twice exceptional classes, these do happen in some schools, some mainstream schools. Streaming by subject area, pull-out programs, ability groups within a regular classroom. Different examples, but they apply for gifted ed, they also apply for twice exceptional students. And the mentors once again. And you'll see Grandin there. In her book, her 1992 one, there's been many more since then, she talks about her vocational success was the result of a number of key mentors, her mother being a very significant one, but it wasn't just her mother, there was a number of secondary school teachers that supported and encouraged Temple. So never underestimate your role as an educator, a therapist, someone, in vocational training. The impact that can have on our young people. Just some others, and again, this goes back, I mentioned Bianco this morning and her authentic-based assessments, assessing children in formal context, in the environment they're in, to see, to demonstrate their understanding, perhaps their skill level, and, their reflective thinking, creative thinking, critical thinking, etc. She also talks about strength-based accommodations, okay? And those authentic assessments lead to, investigating real problems, but really putting in place. And there is an article I do reference again in the other group. Have I got it with me? Yeah. Gifted students with Asperger's syndrome. It's in your reference list. And the other team has a copy of this, but she is got some great practical ideas in terms of thematic units. So this person with autism was focused on all things beetles. That was the high interest, and this girl knew everything about beetles, or thought she did, until the teacher developed a thematic unit, project work based around beetles, and all the other extension activities that were planned for her. And as we were talking about, then you can actually tick against each, or on a checklist, which curriculum area are you covering by her undertaking that unit. You've got her, she's motivated, she's engaged, without her realising she's learning many other things. And my view is we should take it one step further. In such units, you develop goals that are around teaching, turn-taking, social skills, social communication, etc., etc. In that way, I think we do have a chance of moving the, sometimes, very resistant adaptive behaviours that we often spend many hours working on, parents, therapists, teachers, etc. So again, her work is great. And it wasn't developed for people with autism, it was the wider, to us, exceptional group. Right, let's have a quick look. I'm sure you're all familiar. Is anyone not familiar with Stephen Wilshire? Expose yourselves, reveal yourselves. Anyone not heard of Stephen? One, that's fine. Yeah. Well famous Stephen. He's one of the first that really kind of hit the headlines in terms of his savant artistic abilities. Yeah. Far away, Meg. Thanks, Meg. The reason I actually showed you that clip, it's one of Stephen's latest, and I know that he hasn't been here to Fond du Lac, but, Darryl has had, lots of communication with Stephen and his sister, who's his primary carer. But the issue with Stephen, when you look closely at his history, he's had a number of mentors. So, and when I was talking this morning about that Gagne, the French Canadian just across the lake up here, who's worldwide accepted, well, almost, a definition of giftedness. I guess, where am I going with that? I've kind of stalled a bit. Yeah, it was kind of taking, Stephen had the natural savant skill. In the middle of Gagne's model is all those catalysts, the environment, the schooling, facilitation. So the mentorship of his sister originally was one of his classroom teachers, first saw him drawing in the classroom buildings, took the classes out on excursions through London. So he started to draw, come back from memory, so incredible savant memory, and then would draw. He wasn't drawing in situ, and he would draw it later. And that's something referred to, and Daryl talks about, it's called didactic memory, where the memory is a visual memory. And again, that's one of the strengths, a visual memory or visual learning ability on many people on the autism spectrum. And again, the hyperfocus comes into that. But Stephen, again, the message is he had many mentors, and there was a book publisher as well who kind of came along in his journey fairly early on and kind of escalated that and published some of his initial works. And then he's become synonymous for flying over cities around the world, going back and drawing. The only thing that devastates me about that clip, there's not one of Sydney, Australia, and the Harbour Bridge. And we had Stephen out 2010, I think, and I was with him up Sydney Tower looking on the harbour. We went down to one of the local art galleries and he spent 2 days, drawing the whole landscape. So I might contact his sister and say, what happened to my lovely city of Sydney? Wasn't in the clip. But yeah, so that's Stephen, but it's a mentorship issue, I guess I'm talking about. Okay, the key to success for students who display these skills. And again, I mentioned that before. Because the core impairments are resistant to change, and I'm not saying that lightly, it's very well documented. You go to the intervention research and see how many great, fantastic, replicated, evidence-researched, evidence-based interventions, and good luck to you, because in essence, even though there's hundreds and thousands reported, the actual outcomes, if you look very closely, they're not always that brilliant. So I guess, again, I'm blatantly pushing this whole concept. Let's have a go. Let's try it from a different focus, a different perspective. So I guess, after, doing lots of thinking, talking with Daryl Treffett over years, just last year I was thinking, Don I should sit down for a moment and stop running around like a silly, crazed person like I normally do. And I just kind of put this down based on Gagne's model, the model of giftedness. So, and I did ask the team from the Treffett Centre, give me feedback. This has only been published by presented at one conference, our education conference in Brisbane, Australia last year. So on this side, remember, like the gifted model, he talks about natural abilities. So my view is, we've talked about the 3 areas this morning of exceptional skills: relative strength, savant skills, twice exceptional abilities, which is somewhat the higher performing areas. So I've put those down, classified them as all as natural abilities associated with people on the spectrum. If you look here, relative strengths, many of them look similar to the savant skill list, okay, which it's not, it's very easy to see why Daryl called these savant 1. He's called these savant 2 level, more prodigious. But in terms of relative strengths, it's my team's view that's really, we believe, that we think Daryl was kind of, looking at, and they're common among many of our children on the spectrum, which again is unique and it's worthy of discussion. And of course, the recent inclusion of this group. I've only been learning the last few years and, reading, writing more about this group. So I thought, let's bring it together. What are the strengths, exceptional skills or the natural abilities, and I am calling these natural abilities. As I said before, children of my study, they emerged savant skills 2 years, 5 months of age. That's without teaching, without practice. It's the emergence of those skills. To me, something to do with natural. I know Daryl talks about genetic inherited skills, particularly memory, a genetic inherited memory. The difference to this kind of model is we also, as well as the skills and abilities, we do have autism spectrum disorder sitting here as well. And I guess you could say in some ways they fight or are opposing, but I'm saying no, let's bring them together, to see if we can advance the outcomes. And do excuse my shaking hand, I should have said at the beginning. The environmental catalyst under Gagne's model is differentiated educational programs, and this is exactly what the new school, Exceptional Minds, will be doing. The whole school, by its very establishment, is offering a differentiated educational program, and I'm not at all surprised. You already have 41, and you've got a waiting list. That's extraordinary, and I think your waiting list will grow. And then your challenge is how you're going to manage the waiting list, because that's another tension. And I've already got some ideas, so I can share those sometime. But
are you moving here then?
yeah, no, that's right. Open to offers, open to bribes. Yeah, so the school in this case is an environmental catalyst. So there I've just got some of the identification ideas we've talked about this morning for exceptional skills, some of them more directed to the savant skills, some of the, the WISC and the academic achievements for the more able 2A students. And I guess the differentiated program, this is the other side. So it's developing priorities, goals, and it doesn't matter what stage of education and going into the transitioning into vocational programs, it's designing the goals, etc., around the strengths, but also designing the social skills, social communication behaviour, goals centred on those strengths and interests. And my experience has been with working with many young children, particularly who displayed the savant skills, it's the motivation that our children display when they're engaging in their savant skill, their area of interest. We were trying to borrow that interest into their adaptive teaching activity. And, I mentioned the story of a non-verbal child who, when he was excited, engaged, and he was allowed access to his area of strength, he was trying to utter words. He was the closest, his mother thought he was coming to actually speech. And it was only because he was so highly motivated. So we were being very sneaky and designing, communication activities about his, communication, not his speech, around his savant interests. And of course, the whole aim, getting over here, particularly with our people, is we want to find an improvement in quality of life. That may be a vocational program, but it may not. It might be employment, and might be independence pursuit of their savant or their 2E interests, strength and ability. Some of these are taken from the normal gifted ones, so competence in academics, technical skills, science, technology, arts, all of the usual domains. But I guess the other thing that I'm interested in is, can we, by identifying, using these strengths and interests in the program, make a shift here? Are we going to get improvement long term? And I sit here today, this is untested, okay? My hope too is that the Trevor School, you'll have students who'll be with you over a long period of time, hopefully. So you'll be in a really good position to be tracking the progress, and even some going to post-school where you might be able to, follow up on where there are improvements. We're doing a second study next year, if again, another job on one of my flights, finished applying the funding application, but as I said, an exceptional abilities curriculum for children in high school, in schools in Sydney, Australia. Unfortunately, the grant funding won't allow a 6-year study because we'd love to track the students post-school. We're not going to be able to, but if you've got any ideas how that can be done, please let me know. But okay, that makes sense to people? Yeah, so really, and again, I'm being quite honest, it's borrowed from the field of gifted ed. And I thought Gagne's model is a great fit for what we're talking about here, because we're still talking about, strengths, interests. And, in my original model I did, which is in the book, so it's moved on, these were called gifts. And I don't know when gifted education is going to revisit that term gifted. It's probably not the best term. There's others that they could come up with, but one day I'm sure they will. And I'm sure the US will lead that change. Just looking at kind of the transition to vocation and if career is an emphasis. As I said, Jay Young, this chap is on our research team, but from the field of gifted ed. Very bright young man who heads up what's called the Jarrett program at New South Wales University, which has got big links to some of your big US gifted programs here. So he was looking at the career decisions, and Jay's original research was purely with gifted students, not twice exceptional, and he's done a lot of work around that. And just a point of interest, he discovered that many gifted young people, in terms of their choice of career, where they end up, it's not necessarily related to their area of greatest gift or strength. And we chatted about that yesterday as well. And well, even this morning, I'm not running a dog homestay business. Well, I am actually. My partner does that back in Sydney, but I don't have much to do with it. But neither am I an astronomer. Thank God for astronomy, because it would be a disaster, I think. So my interest, I'm not actually in that career. So something just worth thinking about as we push forward and trying to match strengths and interests for our people, even if it's a career path. We do need to, just a caution, we need to make sure we're consulting. What do our people want? Is this what they feel is right for them? And sometimes we forget. We're so busy on our trying to progress and track people forward. The first point, what is it our young people want? So anyway, the advice, and Jay had looked at, the worldwide literature about this. It makes good sense, if possible, to make use of areas of strength and minimise areas of weakness. The expectations of significant others is important in the lives of students. What is it that mum, dad, others are wanting? But I guess, what does the person themselves want? Often it's left out. Ability to develop compensatory strategies. And I know that you guys that are working in transition, post-school, etc., there is work being done around this, and we're about to join a large study in Australia looking at developing training and how you manage some of the mental health issues of people on the spectrum in the workplace, in different employment, different vocations, because this is a university in Victoria, La Trobe, that has a big autism research centre. Some of their research shows where places break down, vocational places, it can often be related to the big meltdown, the mismanagement of the person's anxiety, mental health issues. And I guess that's an important thing for us to reflect on, because you can set up, all the pre-vocational skills and, put in the environmental change in that work environment. But when it comes to the big meltdown, often that's the end. Sorry, guys, it's over, goodbye. And so, that university team working with us are going to look at how can we better support employers to manage when the big meltdown comes, which doesn't always happen, but we do know that there's times of dysregulation. I've been telling Matt I've had a few in my workplace in the last 2 weeks, which has been very exciting. Me having the meltdown, that is, with one of my other directors. Lots of fun. People running to look through the glass window, what was happening. We didn't quite hit the floor, but we were getting close to it. Yes. And we've worked together for 30 years, so we actually have a close relationship, but it just reached a moment of boil over. Development of, highly individualised compensatory strategies. And this is, to me, the important thing. Early age. I don't think there's any age too early to start our work, but particularly focusing on strengths and interests, because your long-term goal is not necessarily at school, it's post-school, isn't it? So it's that early identification that I'm really, keen that people explore. Just some further things Jay found. High level of motivation to succeed. Amount of effort, persistence in the face of difficulty. Many of our people are very highly motivated, have a level of, resilience that many of us couldn't display. It's a matter of finding and supporting that. Success is directly associated with how the disability is viewed. Problems not the disability, but the lack of effort or recognition of the abilities. Strengths, exceptional abilities. The degree of accommodations on the job, the degree to which the role is modified, which is really what I was just talking about, the work setting, work schedules, type, level of supervision, they're all very important, but there's kind of more than that as well. Access to work-related experience for our school-age students, our secondary students, which I'm sure will be very much a feature of the new school program. And I guess, Jay, again, the early focus in schooling, he summed it up and he was looking at the opposite end, going into careers or, post-school. Identification of strengths and weaknesses very early on. Individualised strategy to support both the strengths and the weaknesses, of course, which is, what we do all the time. Provide motivation for success, resilience, persistence in the face of difficulty. Career support, this is often used with gifted students, but it has been more and more used with twice exceptional students around, supporting them into decision making if they're able about, what they may like beyond the schooling years. And again, as I said, the work experience. This is one program, some of you may have heard of it. Anyone, show of hands, the Taylor Institute? Yep, just the one, two. Yeah, Taylor, what state is that again? I can never remember what the MO is. Missouri. Lovely. And I did, scan my Google Maps for ages and I still couldn't find it, so Missouri must have fallen off that particular map. But the Taylor Institute have got a really good program. It's a small program, but where they have, for many years now, been looking at the gifts, strengths of young adolescents, particularly the Asperger high functioning cohort, as they refer to them. So in their program, in terms of vocational program, they look at, a battery of tests, and they did ask, they've been using the nomination screener for savant skills for many years as well, to identify the savant skills in relation to this vocational programming. Find a job that represents the best fit. It just goes without speaking. Analyse the job tasks involved. Examine the areas of strength to compensate for the areas of weakness. So highlighting those, accommodating them into the vocational placement. Train the individual in vocational skills, independent living. I'm sure that's what you normally do anyway. Train the employers and co-workers to work with the individual. And that's kind of the reason for our new study we're going to embark on again if we get the research funding to do so, to train them about how to manage some of the big issues that some of our people sometimes present. And that's, again, the book. Jay has just published this book, and I did tell the story. He walked into my office about a month ago because we're working on the grant for the Exceptional Abilities Curriculum project next year. And he just plopped it on the table and said, oh, have a look at this, some ideas here. And I said, what? I said, what have you been doing? Because he had authored it. He said, yes, didn't you know? And I said, no, I didn't, so please sign it for me. So it's just been published. But again, this is a man who's really primarily in gifted ed, but has been thinking about the gifted disabled cohort and about their careers, vocational kind of stages and transitions. So, I think we've got a pretty neat team together to continue some of this work. And their team, as I said, keep challenging and questioning me, which is even better, to kind of crystallise what we're trying to do. And that's, again, Jeanette, who I mentioned before. Gifted and twice exceptional children still face difficulties. A high intellect does not necessarily equal an easier life. Let you reflect on that one for a minute. That's our Australian artist, Tim Sharp, again, with a sense of humour. So that's Australian hailstones coming down there. Not snow, we don't really get snow much there. It's more like things that burn and melt in the heat. In fact, I said to Matt, I left the country, it felt like the whole country was on fire. Normally you get that sense, one state from another, but it was just, we've had such a hot summer universally across the country. It was just, we're burning. The heat was just kind of everywhere, which is a touch scary, really. Right, you are going to do something quickly, and we can just do this as a group. What are some strategies for developing, an individual education program for children that might display a savant skill, or those with 2E? Just from what we've been talking about. People exercise their memory for a moment. What are some strategies that we could use? I've mentioned one about 20 times, might be a hint. Starts with M. Yeah, well, using a memory skill, yeah, but how could we use that particularly in an educational program? Yeah, mentorships, exactly. Yeah, that's a big one. If there's one thing you leave today, only in your minds, it's the use of mentorships. Yeah, and it makes perfect sense, really, and it's ideally suited to our students. There was one little boy on my original study who had great computer ability, so one of our teacher assistants, who also was the school IT nerd, at the time she offered to be his mentor, and she was still mentoring him 4 years later. That was her commitment to this little young chap, but she got such joy from it, and I wouldn't say the boy always got such joy, because she was trying to broaden his skills, and that is a caution. You need to take it fairly slowly if you're trying to broaden a savant or a particular strength. Even Stephen Wilshire, the artist, you may have recalled in the little video there was some drawings of a woman and some people. That's very recent. Stephen has been an artist for 20, 25 years, and attempts have been made to broaden the scope, to introduce colour, a range of styles and things, and Stephen wasn't ready for it. His thing was that, very focused pencil drawing of cities. So it was fascinating to see some people were appearing in his drawings, because that has taken a very long time. And it doesn't need to be pushed. I did say as the new school goes forward, it's about developing, the adaptive skills of our people, but it's also about further developing their interest area, the skill area. So it gets greater depth and may serve, as a real link into employment, or as a great leisure, recreational, independent activity in their adult lives as people on the spectrum. And never assume that an autistic person wants to follow us and, have careers, working 7 days a week, burning out. We're discussing over lunch. On reflection, why would you want to be doing such things? So, yes. Please don't all leave and resign your positions after this. Not from the school, anyway. Any others? What else? Yep, which I'm sure you guys will be doing. Accelerating your students up a curriculum area. And again, that may even be in a vocational area. Some of the skills might even be more advanced, and that is important. The number of young adults who've got incredible abilities, who are, working in the most menial kind of supported, environments and activities is doing them a disservice. You might think, what a wonderful success. We've had, 99% of our students transition into some kind of vocational program, but is that the right program? Is it matched to their strengths, their skills and abilities? Quite possibly not. So again, there's some questions, things to think about there, I think. And again, is that what our young people want? It's what we may want, mum and dad may want, but, in essence, have we asked those questions? Have we made the right decisions? Have we worked with them on the decision making? Okay. Just further reading, again, particularly, it's in your handout related to this topic this afternoon. Yes, I've got Jay's book there, thank heavens, here. Career Decisions, as I said, it's just come out recently. This is a new one I talked earlier about this morning, the first International Handbook of Autism and Education. So there's your American, Cara Hume, down in North Carolina. If you don't know of Cara, you should look at some of her work. She's known worldwide as, your great person coming forward. And Cara's quite young and she has suffered some terrible illness lately, but is in recovery. So those three editors. Rita Jordan is now emeritus, which means a retired professor, but she's still constantly travelling the world, and she's probably the one that's done the most research about education and autism over the years. And this is a great mate, friend of mine, who we used to work together, and I do work with him at the University of Queensland, and Jackie is the Australian editor. But as I said, interesting, if you do get hold of this, I co-share, I've written this, the other person that's written part of my chapter is the complete opposite end. It's a curriculum for students with, high levels of intellectual delay. So there's the two kind of, parts of the spectrum in that one chapter. Anyway, just watch out, and it's not about promoting what I've done, but this is exciting. In fact, this is finally coming out because it's, and due to these people who wouldn't say are the most, Cara is very proactive and organised, but, I myself was trying to bump this person on, what's happened to that jolly book? I wrote that chapter 3 years ago. What's happened? So finally, September, it's coming out. Yeah, that's Jay's book. And again, I need to reinforce, the importance of listening, including reading what people on the spectrum are writing and telling us. And this is a group of Australians who've recently published this book. Several of those people, Matthew, is on the spectrum. Susanna, this person's not. She's a researcher who occasionally do some work with, an American, quite a few Americans down in Australia. We do let you in, so please come. Emma Goodall is a colleague of mine who's on the spectrum, and she's one of, fast becoming a top educationalist in Australia, looking after autism programs in the state of South Australia, and on a lot of committees with us. Just to conclude, Ban Ki-moon's quote, "People with autism have enormous potential." You might recall as the previous head of the United Nations. Most have remarkable visual, artistic, academic skills. Recognising the talents of people on the spectrum rather than focusing on their weaknesses is essential to creating a society that's truly inclusive. And this is a little drawing. If you look very closely, one of my teachers at one of my schools, when I was doing a workshop about this topic, at the end of it, he'd been sitting doodling, and I saw him in the audience. He came up and said, I said, "What were you drawing?" He said, "This is what I was doing." So there's the teacher in the sandpit holding up her PECs symbols. If only Billy could just pay attention to something, I could get him to do something worthwhile. That was the teacher. Could have been one of my teachers who filled in that survey. Didn't report very well. The little child on the spectrum is doing calculus and algebra in their head. Does that make sense, Mark? Playing in the sandpit. And I just thought it was beautiful that this teacher had been sitting there thinking, yeah, okay, kind of showed me he got it. Right, let's answer those questions, shall we, before I let you out of this room? You've got two things to do. You can fill in if you wish. It's not a forced mandatory activity. There is a little evaluation form. Is it in the book or floating free from the book? Okay, yeah, thank you. But just very quickly, let's go back. We'll just answer those questions, and if we can do it together. And, it's not a true test of your mastery during this day's workshop, but anyone want to have a go at the first one? What are some of the particular strengths and exceptional abilities of people on the spectrum? Some of the ones we've talked about today. What are some of those? You might think of it as which category or some of the different individual skills. Memory, yeah, fantastic. You might be interested to know memory in terms of savant skill is the most common. In the children in my study, 100%. 22 of those children all displayed a prodigious memory skill, and there is a belief memory underpins every one of the other savant skills. The music, the artistic. Remember I said Stephen Wilshire would gaze the landscape, go back and draw it from memory. So there is a belief, and the research is indicating that. Same with other gifted children. Memory has got a very important role to play. Yep, anything else? I'm not letting you off yet. Memory, what else? Yeah, hyperfocus is definitely a strength, yeah. Sorry? Yeah, musical ability. What else? Just seen many examples of the other creative ones today. Sorry? Artistic, yep. One more and we'll stop that one. There is, yeah. Athletic. Even though it's kind of restricted. Do you remember what type?
I believe you said something about balance.
Balance, yeah. Has anyone seen work with young children who've seem to show quite amazing balance? Yep, there's some nods in the back there. Yeah. And again, they're the ones to watch because they do tend to disappear quickly. We have the police helicopters chasing them instead of me. Yeah, great. The next one. What's the difference between an interest or a passion and a strength or exceptional skill? Are they connected in any way? An interest to a strength or a skill? People think they are connected? Yep. What is the connection? Take it one further. Generally.
The skill can be developed more when the interest is there.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not always 100% the case. Yeah. Yeah, correct. That's right. Yeah. In that book, I mentioned the science of expertise. we may need to, after our study, get back to them on that and saying, well, actually, the interest doesn't always necessarily lead to the high skill, which is the current belief by some of our world's top thinkers about what is expertise, genius, prodigious development. Next one, this is an easy one. What's the missing word? Special abilities are more strongly associated with what? Is it social interaction? We're looking at the observable atypical behaviours in a diagnosis. Is it the presence of restricted special interests, RBs? Which one? Yeah, RRBs, thank you. Yep. Sometimes a person's focus on preferred interests or passions can impact their quality of life, participation activities. What might be some of the positive impacts or possibly a negative impact of these preferred interests or passions? Remember, we have talked about some of those today.
Can lead to a career.
Sorry?
It can lead to a career.
Yes, it could. Yeah, it's exactly the message. We're talking about this afternoon, and vocational decision-making, etc., support. What's a negative? Yeah? Yeah, it could. Could interfere with their learning. And I think, in years gone by, as I said, when I first became a teacher of autism, we were often trying to extinguish, using our lovely Skinner approach, our strict ABA, to extinguish some of those interests because they were interfering with learning and, perhaps creating, interesting behaviours. But thank goodness our thinking has changed or is changing. Yeah. Moving on. There's recently been a change in focus. We talked about it throughout the day. What is the new focus or what was the major approach we historically used? Yeah, it was. Remember we talked about that, primarily a deficit view of autism. In fact, most disability really, it's not just autism. And you saw some of the examples, how that then translated into teaching goals. Goals for our therapists, All of us have worked very much along those lines. We've got to remediate, improve that behaviour, the social skill, reduce the sensory hypersensitivity, hypo sensitivity, etc., etc. Okay, but, now it's time we looked at the other side, the more positive one. How about this one? Anyone recall the prevalence of savant skills? Which one was closest? Less than 10, 20%, 30%, 40%, more than 60? Who's got the savant memory skill here? Sorry? Very good, excellent. You can leave now. Yes, you can escape. Yeah, it's around 42%. Well, our study is saying it, our unpublished one. I hope the Treffert sample doesn't skew that. Could. But, yeah. So we believe it's kind of around that. But that's really important. Because I guess when Darrell was first starting to write and, draw our attention to savant skills, it was thought about 10%. Only of the kind of whole autistic population. But the very fact it's more like 40%, that's almost half of the children you as therapists, transition folks, teachers are working with. That is significant. That to me is the biggest red flag or green flag. Go, infuse those into their education therapeutic program. What does the term 2E mean, or twice exceptional? Sorry?
Exceptional skill and disability.
Yeah, what's another one for exceptional? Starts with G. Gifted. Yeah. So gifted with a disability. Yeah. Yeah. Why should we identify and assess the strengths and exceptional skills of our young children? Why not just carry on with doing what we're doing? Yeah, well, what would we like to do about quality of life? Sorry? Yeah, yeah, motivate and, hopefully to get some improvement in some of those quality of life outcomes, because they are poor. Research is saying very clearly. I'm sure Mark could sit and talk for hours about, how he feels and his experience of life, in terms of that. So, next one, what are some ways that we could use to identify these skills and abilities, savant or 2E? Remember we talked about some measures and the different types. There was kind of standardised and non-standardised. Sorry? Yeah, you could have a checklist. It could be an informal one you've developed related to an interest in dates or dinosaurs or postcodes, whatever. What else? I know the Trevor School is going to use some as the children arrive. Interviews, yeah, interviewing significant people. Interviewing the students would be a good start as well. Anything else? Observation, yeah. What else? I'm testing you, group in the corner now. Nomination form, yeah. Another big one that adds pretty rich information about a strength or ability is... You could, yeah, that's the standardised one, yeah. And I would encourage that actually. That's a good idea for your group. And, that's something you question the parents about. Yeah, so, before you let the parents in the door, you have to fill in the ADR form. And it's very short. It takes about 15 minutes. Anything else? I'm looking for something starting with Q. Quick. Questionnaires, yeah, that's right, yeah. They give a very rich amount of information about these abilities. And I guess, like in gifted ed, it's the same. There's no one assessment, there's no one protocol, but to have a range of things that really build up the picture about skills is a valid and I believe the important way to go. Let's just skip down a bit. Any ideas about some of the educational strategies we could bring to bear or put in an educational program? Yes? Yeah, project-based work, absolutely. It's just a beautiful fit for gifted students and our 2E students. What else could we be using? What type of classroom do we want? Strength-based, absolutely, yep. Yeah, visually supported. And something you use all the time in your work now to develop your... What's a major tool that you use in your field of autism, special education? Teachers use it daily. Yeah, the caring atmosphere. Yeah, that was on my tip of my tongue a minute ago, but there's something else. Yeah, being aware of that and kind of building ideas into the program. I've given it away. Yeah, the personalised learning plan. Yeah, I might be using a different term. It's probably why you don't recognise. Personalised learning plan, absolutely. That's your vehicle to put in goals, and if it's the vocational transition plan, the goals based around the strengths and interests. And it's, to be honest, it's as straightforward as doing that. Identify, make sure you know the different strengths you're looking at. Nomination form, teacher questionnaire, interview, observing the child, interview the child themselves. Build up that profile. I showed you a profile template. You could actually put it. These are some of the standardised tests, if they're able. Some of the Woodcock reading, spelling tests, list on the other side, any of the observation measures, nomination form, you've already got a really strong picture about that child's strengths, interests, savants, TUI abilities that probably no other teacher or therapist, parent has ever done before for that student, right there in front of you. Then you can take some of those ideas and put them in their therapeutic program, etc. And it's not rocket science. As we were designing some goals yesterday for one of the new students coming in. It's just slightly thinking outside the square, particularly for teachers who are quite used to, designing goals every day of the week for their students. So fantastic, and I think we'll leave it there. So well done. I think you all got 100% for that. So yeah. So it's up to you if you want to fill in that survey. That's helpful for me for the future. And if anybody wants to follow up, my work email at the top, my home email, surprise, surprise, underneath. When I first started my relationship with Darryl, I was, finding my new email, so it ended up, savant_Clark, so I've never changed it. Great. Any questions? Finish up?
I noticed some of your slides didn't transfer very well to the paper. Will we be getting an electronic copy of your PowerPoint? Or?
I can make those available, through Matt, yeah. Yes, sure. That was a very easy one.
Do you have any literature or recommendations for literature as it relates to working with a student on autism spectrum as they enter into post-secondary?
Into post-secondary. I don't have a great deal, to be honest, at the moment, and there's still, we've got to do a lot more research around that. So not specifically for the TUI population, but, there is research information available in the literature, and just in terms of, people on the spectrum and transition programs, but, very little at the moment about the twice exceptional or savant skills, which is really why we want to do our second project next year if I ever finish writing the funding grant and we receive the fund. We do actually want to explore further. Does a structured exceptional abilities curriculum program, and we're going to be training teachers, so if we get 30 parents and children that come to the study, then we will be training 30 teachers of those children, many of the things we've talked about today. And then over a 12-month period, the teachers will pick the smorgasbord of strategies, embed them in their personal plan, IEP, and then we'll track pre and post. Was there any change? And we're really kind of interested in some of the quality of life measures, which we hope to share with the Trevor Centre as well. But so a lot of it is still quite exploratory at this stage, but I hope it makes sense to you guys. It makes sense to me. And having spent many years in this field and a teacher of students with autism, and also had the great experience of teaching, very prodigious savants, and just extraordinary, really. And I think, I reflect back, and even the outcomes for that particular person that triggered my study have not been very good, partially due to kind of family cultural issues for that young man, which, he hasn't really, flourished the way I would have hoped. But, there are many other influences in people's lives, but, it's a beginning. And I think, the school, as I keep saying, you're in the primary place to add to the literature, to do some more research. And I'm not into great, massive, intrusive research that, you begin to realise, why the hell did I sign up for this? Or, it's beating me down. That's not what I'm interested in at all. It's really about adding, just some further information. And it might be even sounding out one or two particular strategies you're trying, over a reasonably short period of time, did they seem to have a positive outcome? And then those things can be further tested with larger groups, going forward. But I think you're in a great position if you can be looking at some measures to track children coming in. Over time, there's a very great wealth of material you will get for longitudinal outcomes. And that's what we want to know. And there's been a lot of longitudinal studies in gifted education. Lita Hollingworth here in the US, who's, passed many years ago, but she did some of the first major longitudinal studies following gifted children in schools into adulthood, and they're still worldwide, they're accepted and read today as some of the guiding kind of research, and that's what we need, the longitudinal studies, exploring what are the outcomes. Sharing that, of course, you've got to share it, particularly when it's kind of a new field. So, lovely. I think we'll cut, edit. Lots of editing to do up there, I'm sure. So, again, thank you, everyone, and I thank you for your hospitality to Matt, the Trefford Centre, and you're all wonderful. Very nice. So, I'm delighted to have been here, and thank you for the invite, and fingers crossed I might, if I'm invited, turn up again one day, which I'd love to see how the school's going. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, okay.